You're listening to IRN, the Inception Radio Network, Chicago, Illinois.
The Extraordinary Phenomenon Investigations Council presents Epic Voyages. Come join us as we enter and experience the great mysteries of the world with tonight's host,
Alan B. Smith.
Welcome to Epic Voyages Radio, and thank you for joining us around this paranormal campfire. My name is Alan B. Smith, and I'm your guest host tonight. And my guest later on is Jim Mars, author of Alien Agenda and Our Occulted History. But before we get into the amazing Jim Mars, I just want to give a couple of interesting updates that I'd come across on the old internet. From AboveTopSecret.com, via UFOcasebook.com. There's a really, really interesting video. Just a quick quote from the site. A YouTube UFO hunter claims to have found an old NASA video clip from the 1971 Apollo 15 mission, which shows a flying saucer UFO, presumably an alien UFO, parked on the lunar surface, apparently observing the Apollo 15 moon landing. I'm going to put that link in the chat room for y'all to see, because it's really fascinating. Generally, I'm a little skeptic about a lot of the photos and videos that are taken from Moon and Mars and artifacts. I tend to lean on the skeptical side. There's definitely some really great stuff out there, but I think there's a lot of stuff out there that admittedly, I think, but I'm still completely open-minded, I think is some wishful thinking, but this is really, really cool. This will blow your mind, I think, if you take a look at it. Also, Earth Flag from the Smithsonian.com. I don't know if you guys heard about this, but there's this ongoing discussion about creating a flag for Earth to represent Earth and all its people. And just a quick quote from that article. Quote, astronauts have planted 6 U.S. flags on the moon, but Earth is divided into nearly 200 individual countries. In the event that an extraterrestrial group stumbled upon the flags of Earth's resident countries out in the solar system, things could get a little confusing. One graphic designer has a solution. Why not devise a flag to represent planet Earth and all its residents? Now, while the idea might seem like it's from outer space, the premise of intergalactic organizations uniting under one banner is quite common in science fiction. As Ishan Thaor points out for the Washington Post, Robert Heinlein's Starship Troopers book series has the Terran Federation, Star Wars has the Galactic Empire and the Rebel Alliance, and so why shouldn't we have our own flag? It's a really interesting article, and again, I'll post that link right now into the chat room if you guys wanna check that out. Yeah, so again, thank you for being with us. We want to encourage you to go to our Epic YouTube channel and check out all the amazing videos there. Jim Mars is there, our guest. There's a whole slew of videos that he did for some of his presentations. Dr. Rita Lewis, and so many more. I think you'll really love that. Also, our Epic Voyagers Twitter account. You can go there. We could definitely use some more followers there. We're always posting up some updates. And then our Instagram account, which is Epic Voyages Radio, at Epic Voyages Radio. So, and actually, I think a few people that I had come across on the Epic Voyagers account will actually be, for the Instagram account, will be in the chat room tonight. I don't think they're here yet, but I'm looking for them. Rhinohorn25, Wraith in Time, Prestige Multi-Universum, and Palladian Plus. I hope you guys are out there at least listening. And if you guys have any questions later in the show, feel free to use the chat room to post all your questions, but you can also dial in the last hour, and that number is 888-919-2355. That's 888-919-BELL, and then press option 1 to connect to the studio. And all right, so our guest, Jim Marrs. Jim Marrs is sort of like the real-life X-Files conspiracy investigators. Oh, which reminds me, I'm sure all of you are really excited about the X-Files if you haven't heard yet. I know I'm totally ecstatic, and I know Dr. Laura Blythe Tagg is a huge fan of the X-Files as well. So the good news is it's definitely happening in, I believe, January 24th will be the air date. And actually, I'll be doing a show August 10th with the author of Behind the Science of the X-Files and Behind the Science of Star Wars, two awesome science fiction chronicles that we all love. So I think you'll love that show. But anyway, back to Jim. So Jim Marrs doesn't really need an introduction, but you know what? I'm going to go ahead and give an introduction anyway, just in case there's somebody out there that hasn't heard of Jim. So Jim is a native of Fort Worth, Texas. He's earned a Bachelor of Arts degrees in journalism from the University of North Texas in 1966 and attended graduate school at Texas Tech in Lubbock for 2 years more. He has worked for several Texas newspapers, including the Fort Worth Star-Telegram, where beginning in 1968, he served as police reporter and general assignments reporter covering stories locally in Europe and the Middle East. After a leave of absence to serve with a 4th Army Intelligence Unit during the Vietnam War, he became military and aerospace writer for the newspaper and an investigative reporter. Since 1980, Mr. Marrs has been a freelance writer, author, and public relations consultant. Marrs has authored over 10 books, including Crossfire, The Plot That Killed Kennedy, Above Top Secret, and his new book, which I know Dr. Laura Blythe Tagg will be covering in July 6th, and that new book is Population Control: How Corporations Are Killing Us. But tonight we're going to focus on 2 of his classics, as I would call it, Alien Agenda and Our Occulted History. Jim, welcome to the show.
Hey, Alan, it's great to be with you and all my friends in that great epic organization.
Oh, yeah, thanks. It's my honor to have you on. I'm really excited about this. And I wanted to go back to Alien Agenda again because this whole X-Files obsession that I have, that came out in, I believe, 97. And that was at the height of the X-Files when I was really, really entrenched in all things UFO and conspiracies. And I think so much of what you discuss in that book is so prevalent now. And I think with the release of the X-Files coming out again, so many more people are going to go out to the store and pick up that book because it explains the real-life story that the X-Files has built its mythology around. You know,
that they fashion stories around these incidents, and yeah, I'm kind of honored to realize at this late date that everything that I put in there in the 1990s is still very valid. In fact, there's only a handful of things, such as I think the Phoenix flyover happened that very summer as Alien Agenda was being published. And then, of course, we've got the Stephenville thing back in 2013. And then there was an incident over O'Hare Airport. But with those few exceptions, I think that everything in my book, Alien Agenda, is pretty much up to date and is still being studied by students of the UFOs. In fact, I've been told that my book, Alien Agenda, is now the top-selling nonfiction book on UFOs in the world because it's been translated into about a dozen languages.
Yeah, and in the world of ufology, I mean, you know, there's a few names out there that everybody knows, and yours is definitely on the top of the list. And I just think it's testament to the work that you've done. you really helped legitimize, I think, the the ufologist. I mean, people didn't even use that term some time ago, and now people use it confidently. I'm a ufologist, and I think you helped to solidify legitimacy.
That's true. I have seen over my lifetime and over my professional career, UFOs used to be something you scoffed at, and today, as you say, ufologist, UFO, ufology, people just kind of, accept that as at least a legitimate topic of conversation, if not their firm belief. When you mentioned the X-Files, I got to tell you, one of the things that really sticks in my mind is, of course, the brainchild of the X-Files was Chris Carter. And in 2001, early March, I think it was March the 3rd, 2001, Chris Carter put a pilot on TV, and it was a spinoff of the X-Files about the three computer geeks,
the lone gunman,
the lone gunman,
Mm-hmm.
And since you followed the X-Files, you know that Scully and Mulder, they really didn't come up with anything on their own. They mostly were told stuff by the lone gunman, and then they went out and did the gumshoe work to prove it all up or disprove it. Well, so in March the 3rd of 2001, they put out this pilot for the lone gunman.
Mm-hmm.
And in it, it's incredible, Alan, because the basic plot was that one of the lone gunman's father, they thought, got killed in a car crash. And it turned out that, no, he hadn't actually died. And in fact, they caught up with him. And it turns out that a hitman had come and tried to kill him, but he got the drop on the hitman and managed to kill him. And then to cover his tracks and to protect himself, he took the hitman, put him in his car, crashed it into an embankment or whatever, set on fire so that everybody would think he was dead. And of course, the lone gunman's son says, well, why would you want people to think you're dead? He said, because they're still after me for what I know. And he says, well, what do you know? He says, well, I know what's going on with the government. And he says, yeah, but you work for the government. He said, that's right. That's why I know this stuff. And it turns out, what did he know? And why were they trying to kill him? Because he knew that people within the defense intelligence community were planning to hijack a commercial airliner using computer capture Global Hawk technology, do this under the guise of a military exercise, and then guide the airplane into one of the World Trade Centers to blow it up, to blame on Middle Eastern terrorists so they could get their budget increased.
Yep.
And I'm telling you, this was done months before the 9/11 attacks on September the 11th, 2001.
Yeah, well,
and yet that's just about what happened.
Yeah, well, a lot of people actually attribute the show going off the air because of the conspiracy aspect of the lone gunman. And, everything in those shows, the X-Files and Lone Gunman, Fringe later on, I mean, they were basing all their stories on real-life, factual information. And so I think
in this case, though, it was kind of prosaic, and it makes you wonder where some of these writers are getting their inspiration. Are they truly just dreaming up these wild plots, or do they have a pipeline and actually hear what's going to go on?
Well, I can't speak for a lot of shows out there, but for the X-Files, there's definitely intelligent writers on the show. They really do some good digging, and everything they said at the time was relevant to what was going on in the real world. And it's actually it's really interesting that, well, interesting maybe not the best word, but this idea of keeping this secrecy, keeping all this under wraps. My love of my life and I, we actually went to Newfork with a little help of Peter Davenport, and we calculated that approximately since 1561 up until now, there's been 97,000 UFOs reported in the U.S. and just the U.S. and Canada. So it's a wonder that people think that they can really keep this a secret. It's a wonder that they're trying so hard. So, Jim, I guess my lead-in question is why? Why are they trying so hard?
Well, first off, they can't keep it a secret, and you can go back to, you can take 9/11, you can go back to the Kennedy assassination. They can't keep. It's not like there's a lack of information, okay? Which is usually what we think of as a cover-up, is when you can't get to the information. But in those instances and many others, and UFOs the same way, it's not a question of no information. It's a question of obfuscation. Okay, if they can muddy the water, if they can just keep everybody confused, then that's the cover up. Okay, because if everybody's confused, then you have controversy. If you have controversy, then everybody squabbles with everybody else and nothing gets done about it. And that's what they've done with UFOs. I mean, all the way back in the 50s, if you actually check the information and went back and studied the history and everything else, you quickly came to the understanding that UFOs were real. But you couldn't tell the general public that, because every time they listened to the TV or the radio, the announcer would go, UFO, snicker, snicker, snicker. And they got the idea that it was just not a legitimate topic of conversation. In fact, Alan, I can remember when one of the primary arguments against the reality of UFOs was that there were no such things and there was nothing like that in the sky. They were simply hallucinations or perhaps some kind of mass psychosis. And of course, even as a young journalist, I thought, wow, a heretofore unknown, undiagnosed, contagious mass psychosis. What a story. Yeah, but obviously you don't hear that anymore, because with the advent of the camcorder and the cell phone camera, you can't take a picture of a psychosis or a hallucination. So that argument's over with. They're real. They're here. And so we need to start dealing with that fact alone and like, okay, who are they? Where are they from? As you, I'm sure, well know, and most of the epic people know, the UFO issue is nothing new. It didn't start in 1947. It didn't even start in 1897 with the Aurora spaceship crash or the great airship mystery of 1896. It goes all the way back to the earliest writings, the Vedas of the Hindus that talk about those Vyamas, the flying machines that could destroy a city with a single blast. You've got the Sumerians of ancient Sumer, which predates the Egyptians, predates the Bible by thousands of years. And they were talking about people that were flying around in the sky and that came and landed and taught them things. And then you even go to the Bible, of the Old Testament, you got Ezekiel, who says the fiery wheel came and it lifted him up and it took him somewhere and it led him off at a city. And, obviously he's talking about some material thing. He didn't say that, that I was eating mushrooms and had a vision. He says, but he did call it a vision of God because he couldn't explain what it was. So anyway, this is a phenomenon that's been with us, for millennia.
But we can circle around back to that and then get to the why a little later. But I think let's start with Donald Keyhole, Major Donald Keyhole. I think that he's a poignant story because what happened to Donald Keyhole parallels the ongoing debunking battle between, over the decades, the new and the modern investigators and believers. And can you just take us back to Donald Keyhole and just give us a little enlightenment on that?
Well, that goes all the way back, and you got to understand that in the late 40s, early 50s, when the whole UFO topic began to reach public consciousness, there was actually a greater acceptance. I think most people kind of went, yeah, there's something going on here. It took a real concerted effort on the part of the federal government of the United States to slow that down and to distract it and derail it. In fact, are you aware of what I consider the UFO war of about 1952?
Oh, yeah.
About the time of the Washington, D.C. flyover, the military put out orders and said, if you see a UFO, fire on it. Mm-hmm. Well, they did, or they tried to. And what happened? Over the space of several months, almost a year, there was a rash of airline crashes. And it was almost, and of course, nobody was they weren't putting it in this context, but to me, it's when the military was trying to shoot down UFOs, they began to shoot back, and they began to shoot airliners. And these things are crashing all over the place. And then apparently cooler heads prevail, and all of a sudden the military sent out the orders, okay, do not shoot at UFOs. Said just simply report them. And at that point, this rash of airline crashes stopped. And so I myself figured that was the beginning of a covert UFO war. And Kehoe and the members of these early organizations that were looking into that were getting real serious about this. But unfortunately, of course, at the same time, the government was taking steps to institute a policy of denial and ridicule, which has been, up until recently, was quite effective in keeping people quiet about UFOs. The basic idea is that there's nothing there, okay? And if you persist in saying that there is something there, then, you probably need psychiatric help. And even to this very day, I run across people who tell me incredible stories. And when I say, have you told them, made that public, or have you told anybody about that? And they go, no, I didn't want the ridicule. So the government laid that down as an official policy, and it was quite effective right up until just within the past, 5 or 10 years, I suppose.
Right, but before that, I mean, there was actually a period where there was no silence policy. People talked about it openly. So
and what was the trigger? That's when Kehoe published his book on the UFO conspiracy and others, and actually was trying to point readers to the actual information that was available.
Right. And then there was Peebles, Curtis Peebles, who sort of became his arch enemy, I think, right?
Right. He came along. He came along a little bit later, I think, and Peebles took it upon himself to be the head debunker, and no matter what it was, he always had some excuse for what it was going to be. In fact, I addressed that somewhat. I know when I wrote Alien Agenda, I took some of Peebles' most blatant examples of nothing there, folks, and pretty well turned it on him because he obviously had an agenda, and his agenda was to debunk UFOs. Same way with Edward Condon, who was in charge of the Condon Report there at the University of Colorado, and he supposedly was doing this great study on UFOs, and yet I've talked to people who worked with him, and they said he made no bones about it. He said, my job is to debunk UFOs.
Well, so, the Condon Report was around, 1970, 72?
69, I believe, yeah.
Okay, 69. So it was a year-long study, or was it a little longer than that?
Might have gone a little bit longer than that, but it never was a study. It was just, that was... even then, his own report was trying to debunk UFOs. Nevertheless, admitted that there was several dozen cases that they could not truly explain, and that's really saying something because they went to great lengths to debunk almost any sighting. For example, if somebody said they had this experience, saw this UFO, and they say, which direction it was in? Well, it was in the west. And they go, oh, well, then that was Venus. They would just go for the simplest, quickest answer rather than get serious about investigating UFOs.
Well, before all that fear-mongering happened, there was the U.S. meteorologist, Dr. James E. McDonald, who told a congressional committee, quote, I must stress that much checking on my part has convinced me that Kehoe's reportorial accuracy was uniformly high. His reliability must be recognized as impressive. There's no way you're going to get a meteorologist to say that today.
No. They won't even admit that chemtrails are up there, and yet all you have to do is look up, see the difference between a condensation trail, which evaporates fairly quickly, and then a chemtrail, which goes from horizon, does not dissipate. I interviewed J. Allen Hynek one time, and there's another good case. He starts off working for the government, and he basically tried to debunk UFOs. There was a thing up in Illinois, I guess, Michigan. Michigan. That was cited at some girls' college, and the administrators and teachers and the students, and they all saw this thing, and they were all telling very spectacular stories about it. So Hynek goes up there, and he's the one who made the famous press conference and said that what they had seen was swamp gas. And this so incensed their congressman, Gerald R. Ford, that Ford got up and said he was going to launch a congressional investigation into UFOs. But apparently somebody got to him because he never did follow through on that. But he was well rewarded because he became our only unelected president.
Sure. Well, and Hynek, I mean, that the whole swamp gas thing, obviously haunted him for a long time, but that he actually didn't say, it wasn't in the report that was the cause. It was a part of a list of possibilities, and they just picked that one out, right? And ran with it.
Well, the people who had the experience, they knew, excuse me, they knew that it wasn't swamp gas. And you're right. I think Hynek came to regret his role in trying to debunk UFOs, because I know by the time I interviewed him, he was already writing pro UFO books and admitting that the government had been skewing the evidence, against UFOs.
So then, okay, so we've got Kehoe.
So I think that should tell us something right there. The J. Allen Hynek, a very respectable scientist who is hired by the government basically to debunk UFOs, eventually comes around to saying that's what they're trying to do and it's not right because there's something very real going on there.
Right. Well, the trigger for that, too, for him was the Condon report, I think. I think
right.
that once he saw the reality of what was going on and the misuse of information, where they were actually holding back some of the better reports. I think Project Blue Book was doing a similar thing. They held back the better reports and only reported on the ones that were, more easily
But they could explain, yeah.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Exactly. That's what I'm saying. It was non-investigation. It was just a government pronouncement, and an erroneous one at that.
Yeah. Okay. So you have this earlier generation, let's say, early 1900s up until the beginning of the 50s, where there was an open dialogue. I mean, the public, newspapers were reporting on this, and it wasn't necessarily taboo. Even the military, it wasn't taboo yet. And then so that transition where it was shoot them down to they don't exist. Why would they do that? What's the reason for them to say, okay, we need to make this hush hush?
Well, I think it's pretty simple. It's because what is the purpose of government? Okay, do we really want government there so they can keep taxing us more and more, so they can keep curtailing our liberties, so they can keep, lording over us? No. The basic excuse for government is for the common defense. Okay, the government will defend you. Well, if they admit that these things are flying around, and particularly that they're flying over our military installations, and in fact, back in the 60s and early 70s, they apparently were messing with our nuclear launch codes, well, then, that's hostile. And yet there's nothing we can do about it. Well, if there's nothing we can do about it, and these things can fly through our airspace unhindered, then why do we need the military? Why do we need to keep paying more taxes to the government?
Well, so true, but I mean, you could also
they cannot admit that. Yeah. Also, you have to understand that up until fairly recently, the intelligence agencies and the military have been under the control of people with a World War II mindset. The enemies are out there. We got to protect the country, and it's up to the military and the intelligence agencies to do whatever they can to protect the country. And I'm reminding of an interview I had with Colonel Corso, who wrote the book The Day After Roswell, and kind of broke the story on how that we'd gotten alien technology and had fed it into our military-industrial complex. But when I was talking with Colonel Corso, I said, well, Colonel, I said, the tone of your book is that these UFOs are hostile, and that we need to be wary, if not inimical to them. I said, why do you consider them enemies or hostile? He says, well, they would fly over our military installations and we'd order them to stop and they wouldn't stop. Now, you laugh, I laugh, but he said that in all seriousness. That's World War II military industrial thinking. If you don't stop, then you're wrong. And yet I can't help but think. I don't know about you, Alan, but I'm thinking back in the 60s, 70s when there are documented instances of UFOs coming over some of our nuclear facilities and apparently messing with the launch codes for those nuclear ICBM missiles. I'm thinking, perhaps they were saving us from blowing ourselves up,
Yeah, and I understand that point of view, but I also wonder, if we can draw a parallel to the Cold War, it was the fact that we knew that the Russians had advanced technology. It was the fact that we knew that they had nuclear capabilities that the government, just like after 9/11, the government used that to get more money, to pump more money into the military-industrial complex. So you would think that this other threat would be just one more reason, like, hey, we need to pump even more money, and we don't,
Yeah, but you're comparing a known threat with an unknown threat. Mm-hmm. In fact, I would disagree with you on this knowledge during the Cold War. I did a book called Sci-Spies. This is the true story of America's psychic warfare program. This is where our military was experimenting with and then using operationally the psychic ability known as remote viewing, where they're able to throw their minds out. And we'll get to that in a minute. There's an interesting thing there because they all went out looking for Russian or Chinese super weapons and they found UFOs. But my point is that I think the Cold War actually was built on secrecy. We didn't know for sure what the Russians had. We know they had some advanced stuff. We know they were the first into space. And so we were very concerned, but we didn't know for sure what they had, and they certainly didn't know for sure what we had. And as a result, I personally happen to believe that the Cold War ended largely because of this psychic warfare program, because they have documented this, proven it up, and used it operationally to spy on each other. And what happened was the Russians also had their remote viewers, but they were called extrasensors. And both sides were looking to see what the other one had, and they all found out the truth. And we found out the Russians weren't near as militarily advanced as we thought they were, and they certainly didn't have any depth. And then they found out that we had everything we said we had, plus more, plus working on more stuff. And so with the secrecy ended, so did the Cold War. That's just, never mind, we'll go do something else. And they did.
So perhaps then they could have thought, because like you said, we don't know what this is. Perhaps their thinking was, let's keep it a secret, because if we can capture this technology, we don't want anyone to know what we've captured.
Exactly. It's potential military weaponry.
Okay.
And that's been a big part of it. But then I will tell you what my overlaying reason for the secrecy over UFOs, to my mind, is because of what I would call the globalists. Actually, that's their self-styled globalists. They call themselves globalists. And these are people who are so wealthy that they consider their business playing field the entire world, And they look upon the United States as simply a not-so-profitable branch of their world holdings. And I think they are the ones, because they're the ones who actually run the government and run the economies. They run the banking systems, and they run Wall Street, and then they run Washington. They run the Kremlin. And these are some people call them the New World Order people. But the point is that they owe their power to their wealth, and they owe their wealth to their monopolies over energy and telecommunications, transportation, pharmaceuticals. And I don't think they truly care if we know that there's extraterrestrials visiting the Earth or that there's aliens on other worlds out there. They don't care about that. But what they care about is that if we know for certain that there's spacecraft able to travel from other galaxies or other solar systems, then we're going to know for sure that there's alternative technologies out there, and we're going to not continue to pay increasing prices for petroleum-based fuels and for pharmaceuticals, et cetera, because we would know that there are alternatives to their monopolies.
Right. Right. And if you're just tuning in, this is Epic Voyages Radio. I'm your host, Alan Smith, and we are with the great Jim Mars tonight. Jim, going back to one of your points, Neutron in the chat room, he wanted to ask a question. He said, Jim, why did Russia always fail any attempts to go to the moon, in your opinion?
Well, first off, we don't know for sure that they failed. We simply have not been told that they succeeded. In fact, there is some evidence that they may have actually launched some moon probes, but maybe they failed and they didn't quite make it, and so it was such a closed society in the Soviet Union that, rather than admit failure, then they just won't admit that anything like that happened. But
so basically, in your opinion, do you think that maybe a probe and not necessarily a manned mission has made it there?
It's possible. So many things are possible. I mean, there's even questions about Apollo 11, and none the least of which is if that happened, in 1969 we landed Armstrong on the moon, that was one of the greatest leaps for mankind in history, and yet NASA said they lost all the films for that. They don't have that anymore. They didn't think that was that important. What? Give me a break. So wait a minute. What does all this mean? And even now, officially we made 6 trips to the moon. But I'm old enough to remember before we went to the moon, the whole talk was that we were going to colonize the moon. We were going to set up a colony. We were going to mine the minerals on the moon, and they were going to pay for the space program. And we were going to use the moon as a launching point to then go on to Mars, or have colonies on Mars. And then all of a sudden it's that, never mind about that. Oh, it's just a dead world. We don't want to go there. Even though they had...
it makes sense on the front of it because it's a return of investment.
Yeah, well, that's it. They would have gotten a return, but no, we didn't go back. In fact, they said, well, it's just too expensive, so we're not going to do that. And there's nothing there. And supposedly we've never gone back. And yet they had 22 of those Atlas rockets that put our guys on the moon. They had them all ready to go. Sure, so it's kind of it's a situation kind of like you build a Rolls Royce in your garage, but then you don't drive it because you can't afford the gasoline. It doesn't make sense. Frankly, I think we were warned off the moon. I think we're quarantined here on Earth until we can get our act together and be good members of a galactic community.
Yeah, well, that link that I put up there in the chat room. There's a video from NASA stock footage from the Apollo 15. It's crazy. It was one of those videos where it just really stopped me in my tracks. It was so clear a non-natural object in the background, and it looked almost exactly like a saucer UFO. It was crazy.
Well, the question, of course, is, I think the question is, though, is that truly an alien ship, or could that be one of our secret stuff that we're not talking about? I'm sure you've heard the argument about the presence of a secret space fleet, and there's no question that we've had billions, if not trillions of dollars, missing, okay? In fact, the day before the 9/11 attacks, Donald Rumsfeld announced that the Pentagon could not account for $2.3 trillion, which was like 4 or 5 times more than what that yearly defense budget was. Now, that's a whole potload of money. Where does that money go to? It's not like I had it in my pocket when I came in. I don't know what happened to it. No, forget it. There's all this money and all of this effort. And yet, at a time when there's 2.3 trillion missing, that was just that 1 year, and there's been more since then. Where is it all going to? It's not going to rebuild the infrastructure of this country, because the American Civil Engineer Society gives our infrastructure a grade of D+. We got buildings and bridges and dams and roads that are all deteriorating, and they don't seem to have the money to fix those. But we got these trillions that go missing, and of course that kind of brings us to the theory of alternative 3, which is that the wealthy elite are preparing to go off-world if natural disasters or war starts.
Well, did the mainstream media, in your memory, did they ever get back to that Donald Rumsfeld statement about trillions of dollars? They never got back to that, right? Yeah.
No, it's just kind of dropped that. In fact, if you want to get your suspicions aroused, the very next day, the Pentagon's hit on a side that they'd been renovating, and there was hardly anybody in there except the Army's accounting office, the very people who would be tasked with finding out what happened to that $2.3 trillion, and all but one of them got killed in the blast.
Mm-hmm. Well, actually, I got another question from Neutron. He was asking, is the rumored Apollo 19 Mona Lisa mission true in your opinion, bringing back a body? Have you heard of that?
I've heard rumors of that, but I have no idea whether that's true or not.
Okay.
But in the past, I would be tempted to say, no, I don't think that probably happened. But I'll tell you what, the way things are going today, the secrecy that they lay on, the way the government sometimes will lie to you when they really have no reason to do so, I don't know. I think all bets are off. I'm willing to listen to anything today. Yeah, I say listen. I didn't say believe.
Yeah, exactly.
In fact, I would advocate everybody just, you want to keep an open mind, but you don't want it so open that your brain falls out.
Well, look, since we're on the moon anyway, can you explain to us this idea of the hollow moon theory or the spaceship moon theory? I know, like, in your book, you gave some points of evidence, like the 1972 bell sound.
Right.
And sent shock waves to the center of the moon. No waves returned, and scientists were just baffled by that. So
NASA scientists said that when that lander crashed back onto the moon vibrated and rang like a bell, in their own words, for hours, for like 6 hours or 7 hours. And of course, that's not the first time that people came up with the idea that maybe one of the moons is hollow. Carl Sagan, early in his career, along with some Russian scientists who were studying Phobos, the moon of one of the moons of Mars, and they swore up and down it had the characteristics of an unnatural satellite, and that it might be hollow. What's interesting is at one point I was talking with Dr. Edgar Mitchell, the sixth man to walk on the moon, and I asked him, I said, what do you think about this idea that the moon's hollow? And he kind of laughed. He said, oh, no, the moon's not hollow. But then he had to go on. And he said, well, of course, we do know that the denser materials are on the outside and that it's lighter on the inside. And in fact, he said scientists are thinking that perhaps there are these giant caverns inside the moon. Well, of course, here's one of our astronauts. I didn't want to get in his face, but I'm thinking to myself, wait a minute, hollow moon, giant caverns in the moon. What's the difference?
Right. Well, there's also, as you note in the book, Alien Agenda. And again, if anybody listening wants to dig more into this, please go out and get Alien Agenda. You can go to jimmars.com. This book is it's dense. It's so dense. It's packed with so much information. I love it.
Well, you don't have to read it straight through. You can just read a little bit at a time.
Well, and it's a good book to keep on your shelf. It's a little encyclopedia. Keep it
in the bathroom. Read a little bit every day.
I don't read in the bathroom. I'm not one of those. But hey, So I wanted to get to the to this idea of a moon not being there. That there was a time when there wasn't a moon, which actually might support this whole spaceship moon-based satellite theory.
Well, let me tell you, Alan, I think the biggest argument for the moon is that it should not be where it is. Even Isaac Asimov, who, in addition to being a great science fiction writer, also was a great scientist. And he said the moon should not be where it is, but it is. So here's the thing. When I was a kid in school, we were kind of taught that the moon had broken away from the Earth. But now, since we've been to the moon, we know that the composition of moon rocks is not the same as on the Earth. In fact, they have found rocks on the moon that go back more than 10 billion years, which makes them older than the Earth, which is only about 8 billion years old. And so picture this. So obviously the moon then came from somewhere else. And so it comes out of space and it passes by the Earth, and the gravitational field of the Earth pulls it back. And then it goes past again, gets caught in the field, comes back. So over time, it eventually goes into orbit around the Earth. Well, it should be in a wobbly, oblong orbit, see? But it's not. It's in a near perfect circular orbit that circles the equator of the Earth in a stationary orbit, one side always facing the Earth. How is that possible naturally? And the answer is it's not. Okay, which means that some intelligence guided and parked the moon where it is. And not only is it in a near perfect circular orbit, stationary around the equator of the Earth, but it's at just the proper distance. So when it eclipses the sun, it neatly covers the corona of the sun. Now that's a very specific distance. And how does something naturally get that way? Well, it really can't. But this kind of, I guess, gives a clue as to how our thinking goes, because we know that the moon has been there as far back as recorded history for the most part. And so we know that in the past we didn't have space flights, so we couldn't have parked it there. But we also know there's no such thing as aliens. So therefore, let's just don't talk about that.
Yeah. And it's been some time since you actually wrote the book. I'm wondering, has a mathematician anywhere out there done the actual statistical data, find out what the odds are that all these things would coalesce on this one satellite? Has anyone actually tried to make a study of that?
I don't think so. I think the idea is it's like so many of these anomalies on the Earth, and of course I love that word, anomalies. That's a scientific jargon for WTF. Is it? I don't know. So we won't talk about it, okay? So no, as far as I know, they haven't done that. But I do know that the most current thinking on the moon, and this is really, really interesting to me, is what they're calling the big whack, which is that some body came in to our solar system and collided with another body, possibly a moon or whatever, and it broke apart, and then it coalesced and went into orbit around the Earth, and that's where the moon came from. And the reason I find that very fascinating is because the ancient Sumerian tablets that tell us about the Anunnaki who came to the Earth and colonized also gave a allegorical history of our solar system and said there was a big planet called Tiamat that was about 4 times the size of Earth that lay out in the orbit past Mars, and that when this planet Nibiru with its attendant moons came through the solar system, one of the moons hit Tiamat and shattered it, and half that world just went to pieces, but remained in the orbit past Mars, which of course would be the asteroid belt, and that the other part of Tiamat was knocked past Mars's orbit and went into orbit at the third place around the sun, and then coalesced into the Earth. And that's where the Earth came from. This also may explain why they are continually finding these meteorites or pieces of rock that obviously originated on the planet Mars.
So I'm sorry, you're breaking up a little bit. Are you further away from the computer right now, or do you need to get a little closer?
No, I'm sorry. Hopefully I'm right here. And this computer, I don't even know where the microphone is, so I don't know how to get to it, actually. Okay, but I'll try to stay right here and stay.
Yeah, sounds a lot better now already. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, cool.
So anyway, you got that though, yeah. And I think you're aware of the fact that they've got these meteorites or they've got rocks and materials that they found on the Earth that obviously apparently originated on Mars. In fact, that has led to some theories that life on the Earth was actually seeded from other places, perhaps Mars, perhaps other planets.
Yeah, and I from what I've seen, I think the evidence does look pretty good for Planet X or a Nibiru. But
Yeah.
I think what the issue that I have is that every so many years, somebody comes up and says, it's coming this year, or it's coming in 2 years. And and you know, when that happens, there's just no way that mainstream media is going to take it seriously.
That's right.
And so what's your take on that?
Well, I'm not sure they'd take it seriously, even if they took it seriously. I mean, put yourself in the position of President of the United States, and if scientists came to you and said, well, this planet's going to be coming back in through our solar system in a few years, and it's going to disrupt everything, and we're liable to have a pole shift and 500-mile-an-hour winds, and, you know, it's going to level everything. There's going to be tidal shifts and tsunamis that are engulf the west and east coast. You know, would you really tell the people? You know, would you get everybody panicked and fearful, running around when there's nothing anybody can do about it, or would you let them go ahead and be fat and happy right up to the very end? It's a good question, and I'm glad I'm not in the position of knowing for certain, and then trying to decide if it's my obligation tell the public or to keep them happy and in the dark.
Right, and there's actually so much more to this moon theory and to Tiamat that we just can't possibly cover tonight. There's so much evidence.
That's true. But if you mentioned my one of my latest books, our occulted history. And first, let me point out, when I use the term occulted, don't worry, you're not going to have to read about devil worship or zombies or anything that we normally think of as the occult. I use it in the astronomical sense, in that when the moon eclipses the sun, that's called an occultation. It occults the sun, which simply means it hides or masks the sun. So what I'm actually talking about here is our hidden history. And the first part of that book, I deal with evidence that indicates that there may have been intelligent life, extraterrestrial life, visiting all through our solar system, not just on the Earth, because you got the pyramids on Mars, you got the base on Mars, you got all of this intriguing things, you got all these things on the moon, and again, we find pyramids on Mars, the moon, all over the Earth. We keep finding new pyramids all the time, and I think this points to a super high technical civilization that was on this planet long before we came along.
Right, and then we say before we came along, I just want to get to this topic of the moon not being there.
Well,
when you look at the proselynes, right, and this is the claim to Arcadia. What is that?
Well, there are certain tribes and certain legends that have been handed down since the earliest times, where they claim there was a time when there was no moon in the sky. I don't know, and I'm not sure anybody's done the proper amount of scientific study on that. But I think all I can say is that I think the moon has been with us as far back as our written history goes. Now, before that, when you start getting back into the past 10,000 years ago, past 20,000 years ago, everything is just hand-me-down, verbal communication, and a lot of that's been garbled and been lost. So I don't think we'd be able to prove much of anything, but all we know is the moon's been there as far back as we have recorded history, and we know that at that point in time, there was not the technology to go to the moon and do anything on the moon. Again, this indicates that there were other intelligences operating besides us.
Right. So it's hard for people to accept that, Jim. It's not well taught. It's not conventional,
education. But again, so much of what we're taught is not true.
Right, but even from an instinctual place, almost. I mean, you grow up with the moon; it's there. It's a part of your world, your reality. It seems natural because you were born and you looked up at the sky, and there it was all the time. So for someone to say to you, "Well, it's not really a moon," it's not what you think it is. people are going to have a hard time swallowing that, because the moon is a sacred thing for them too. I mean, especially,
Well, there's whole legends, even religions that have grown up around the moon. And what you're actually dealing with, Alan, is what they call normalcy bias. Okay. Yeah. You go and you turn on the kitchen sink and water comes out. Now, just 100 years ago, or maybe even less, that would have been a miracle. You turn a valve and water comes out. Holy cow. Good water, drinkable water. That was a miracle. And today, though, through normalcy bias, I mean, today, if no water comes out, then we get concerned. And it's like, well, what's going on? Because we are so used to it. You're used to going and turn on the water. You're used to flushing your toilet, and it just flushes. More water comes in, and most people do not think that how miraculous that really is, and how that, with just some slight perturbation in our little complicated civilization, all that could end.
Right.
I mean, you got a pipe break, you got no water. And of course, we have the infrastructure in place where plumber will be right out, the city will work on it, and boom, within a few hours or a day, you're going to have your water back. But what if the whole city goes down? What if the state goes down? What if the country goes down?
Right.
We're not prepared for that.
No, the vast majority are definitely not prepared for that. That's for sure. But, for you and I, and probably most of the listeners out there, the satellite moon theory, spaceship moon theory is something that we've heard about, we looked into. But I guess a parallel for me would be if I were to tell somebody that the water coming out of this natural spring is actually coming out. There's an underground civilization. They're making water and they're pumping it out through the string. If I told that to somebody, they would look at me like I have 500 heads.
That's
so
right.
Have you, what is your approach when you come up to somebody and you say, and they ask you about this for the first time, and they're just learning about this? Where do you start so that as to not sort of blow them away and turn them off?
Well, what I tell people, and I'm telling you and I'm telling your audience, don't believe me. Don't trust me. I'm not a preacher. I'm not a politician. I'm not here to sell you something. I'm sitting here to give you some information. If you read my book, Alien Agenda, and read the whole chapter on the moon, and then go and study background that, find out, is this true or is not? Then you go find other instances. And so what you do is you just take a statement. Well, let me tell you about my hunt file, okay? When I get some information, it comes in and it flies in the face of what I had previously believed or what I've been taught. I go, and I do not automatically believe it, but I don't automatically disbelieve it. I simply, what I say, put it in my file, okay? And then I file it away and just remember that, and then keep it in mind until I get further input. Now, as further input comes in, there's going to be more and more information that supports that thesis, or it's going to be a lot of information that debunks it and destroys it. So what you do is you don't believe anything and you don't disbelieve anything. You just form your hunt file and wait for further information.
All right. Well, Jim, we're coming up on a break. Just a reminder to anybody who's tuning in, this is Epic Voyages Radio, live on Inception Radio Network, and is also rebroadcast on Fridays on the darkmatterradionetwork.com. Tonight we're talking to Jim Marrs about Alien Agenda and his book, Our Occulted History. We've put some links in the chat room. If you're just joining us, you can check those out. Check Jim's book out online. We will be back in a few minutes, so stay with us.
Listening to IRN, the Inception Radio Network, Chicago, Illinois.
Hello, Inception Radio Network listeners. This is Amanda. Remember, you can take your Inception Radio shows on the go Just download the Inception Radio Network app for your iPhone, iPad, or Android smartphones and access live shows, past shows, guest lineups, and much more. Just visit the iTunes Store or the Google Play Marketplace and download it today for free.
Don't have a computer? Is your internet connection down? Don't worry. Use your trusty cell phone or landline and call into our listen line at 401-283-6700 to listen to the Inception Radio Network 24/7. Again, that call-in number is 401-283-6700. For the Inception Radio Network, I am MJ.
Are you a fan of Inception Radio Network? Do you reckon it's the best alternative talk radio station on the planet? Well, if you do, head to facebook.com/Inception Radio Network and like the page. Tell your friends, spread the word, and keep listening to the best.
You didn't forget what's coming up tonight, did you? Hi, Inception Radio Network listeners. This is Amanda. Never miss that interview you were looking forward to or the show on your favorite topic. Follow IRN on Twitter, I_R_N, and get reminders about the evening's live shows as well as fun and important updates throughout the week. That's I_R_N, and never miss a great show again.
By Dream Nuage and Relax. That's DREAMNUAGE.com. Simple, raw, organic.
Looking for a cure for boredom? Never worry, IRN's interactive website introduces a number of ways to pass time while you listen to your favorite show. Choose anything from the IRN Chat Lounge, Game Lounge, Video Lounge, or the Mood Lounge. These fun, exciting features let you chat in real time with fellow listeners, view live skywatches, play daily posted online games, or pick a show based on topic. The choices are endless, so use your time wisely by keeping it all on IRN.
Howdy, this is Joe Mars. I'm inviting you to tune in to Epic Voyages, 8 p.m. Central, 9 p.m. Eastern, Monday nights, right here on Inception Radio Network. To find out more about Epic and how you can become a member, visit epicvoyagers.com. That's EPICVOYAGERS.com.
Hey everybody, welcome back to Epic Voyages Radio. This is Alan B. Smith. I'm your guest host tonight. Our guest is Jim Mars, and taking us out of the break was Living on the Edge by Aerosmith. And we're definitely living on the edge tonight with Jim Mars. Because if you are part of the mainstream, then this is not what you talk about around the watering hole. This is a great night with Jim. He's always full of amazing information that will blow your mind. So, Jim, I want to get back to the moon and this whole idea that it didn't exist at some point in time. I'm really stuck on this, I admit, but it blows my mind.
Well, it is a fascinating topic, but I think it's kind of an exercise in futility because if we had to go back and document a time when the moon was not there, you're going to find very, very scant evidence. There's just some vague mentions in old legends about time before the moon. Okay, big deal. But as far as we know, everything has ever been documented. Anything has been written about back to the Old Testament and even the Sumerian tablets. Mm-hmm. You know, there's mention of the moon. So the moon's been with us certainly all our known history.
Right. Well, if it goes back to that time, then we're also talking about the time of the Anunnaki.
Right.
So it would only make sense that it would be here by the time that they're here, right?
Right. And also, though, if you go back to the time of the Anunnaki, if you follow their numbering system, they talk not just once, but several times when they talk about when it all started, they go back more than 300,000 years ago. And, that was even before my time.
Sure. Well, but there's also a lot of evidence out there to say that humans are way more advanced and had full-fledged civilizations even far as back as 300,000, a million years.
Exactly, and we're learning stuff all the time. Today, our military and even some police forces have sound cannons. Okay, it's weapons that fire blast of intense sounds enough that set up vibration that can break up crowds, that can even knock down walls, can do this stuff. And we think the ones who know about this technology, we think, wow, look at this modern technology we have. But all you got to do is go back to the Bible and read about Joshua and Battle of Jericho. It said that they marched around the city 7 times, they blew their horns, and they all started shouting, and the walls came down. So I think there was an understanding of sonic weapons way back in biblical times.
Right. Yeah. And that brings up another question of mine is that, okay, let's assume then that there's this technology, this super advanced technology that was in existence. It was working. There was the whole society using this advanced technology. But is it really the same kind of advanced society as we are? Because I can only imagine we have a lot of junk. We have a lot of trash.
Right.
If our society, dwindles away and is covered by time, I would still imagine that there would be plastics, there would be metals, caught in rock, and the whole planet would literally be littered with evidence.
1,000 years from now, 1,000 years from now, somebody's going to dig up a Coke bottle and say, "Gee, I wonder what this was," and his compadre is going to say, "I don't know, but obviously it's a fetish to the female form."
Right. Or just
we
let's give
have
it to
no
the
idea.
Smithsonian.
We have no idea what they're doing.
Yeah. So if you look back, then where is all that evidence? I know we have pieces here.
Well, if you're using natural technologies as opposed to our mechanical technologies, for example, they have found in South Africa thousands and thousands of these stone circular edifices. And they try to explain it away as saying, well, these are just corrals, where they kept their 20,000 years ago, they kept their cattle. But wait a minute, there's no doorways, and plus there's circles connected to circles. And, what's that all about? And what they've actually found is within these circles, it actually picks up and enhances Earth energy, because outside of these circles, if you dig down 60 feet, the average temperature is about 42 degrees, but within these circles, when you dig down, the average temperature goes up to 132. So they're drawing energy and warmth out of the Earth, and they knew how to do this. We don't know how to do this. We're just now figuring out that that's the case. So again, yes, I see what your point is, and I think it's right. I think building metal things and had lots of plastic and junk like we do, that thousands of years later, we'd be finding a lot of this stuff, but I think they were using natural forces. I think the Great Pyramid, I agree with Christopher Dunn, the British engineer, who says he thinks the Great Pyramid was a power generator. And I think these other pyramids around the world go back before our recorded history, and I think they evince a highly advanced civilization that was using pyramids to transmit power all around the world. But today, they've fallen away. They've gone into disuse. The land has gobbled them up. The seas have poured them up. And today, we only have a few worn down little and big pyramids, and what they're all about. I went to all of them and all of the palaces and the Egyptian hieroglyphics are glyphics up there. And yet, I'm not sure, again, we're told that it was a burial chamber, but that doesn't seem to hold true, because it's not like any of the other burial chambers. Also, we know that the Great Pyramid contained some sort of machinery, because when Napoleon's troops took over Egypt back in the early 1800s, they thought on these devices in the Great Pyramid, and they thought that they were of the devil, so they hauled them out, broke them up, and burned them. So we don't know what was all in there or what their original purpose was all about.
Yeah, so actually, there are some artifacts. There's the Antikythera mechanism. We also have the Baghdad battery, the Voynich manuscript, and what, like you said about the Great Pyramid, and I know a lot of people are familiar with this already, but the fact that it's completely blank on the inside as far as hieroglyphics go, and they base their whole theory that it's Khufu's chamber because there was a graffiti with his name on it. It just seems to me, even if you're conservative,
one little piece with the name Khufu on it that was fortuitously found by a guy named Weiss, who was about to lose his grant money because he hadn't come up with anything in the Great Pyramid. And there's a pretty considerable argument that was a fraud. And that's the only thing that even suggests that it was a tomb.
Yeah, and it's a wonder why mainstream archaeologists would, just look past this. I mean, the mainstream archaeologists are not, they're not the ones that are covering up the alien agenda, or, they're not part of the secret society. So what is it that keeps them ultra without being able to look at the actual fact?
I think, well, geologically, and I read this, and when I was in Egypt, I checked it out. It's absolutely true. On both the Sphinx and the Great Pyramid, there is very obvious vertical erosion, which means that the geologist will tell you that means both of those structures set out under very heavy rains for a very long time. And yet the Egyptologists and the archaeologists would argue, no, that can't be right because it was all built by the Egyptians. Well, again, the geologists tell you there's not been significant rainfall on the Giza Plateau for more than 10,500 years, which means at least the Sphinx and the Great Pyramid set out to the elements more than 10,500 years ago, which leaves out the Egyptians, which only go back about 5,000 years. And of course, the problem there is that having been in Egypt, their whole economy is based on tourism, and that there's all kinds of reputable scientists and archaeologists and authors and, who've based their entire career writing about the majesty of Egypt and how that the slaves of the Egyptian dragged stones through the desert to build the pyramids, and never underestimate the power of the status quo. Nobody wants to give all that up.
True, but to me it would be way more tantalizing if the theory said, wait, this goes way further back than what. But then they're going to have at this point.
Yeah, then they're going to have to start all over and rewrite all the books.
That is true, also.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, hey, but then that employs a lot of authors.
People, particularly people who are making their living off of certain conventional knowledge, they do not want to change. See, you and me, we don't care if somebody's come up and has the evidence to show that the Sphinx and the Great Pyramid were built by some earlier civilization that predated the Egyptians, maybe even predated the Sumerians. Hey, we'd be very interested. We go, wow, that's cool. I want to know about it. But, if we had published books all our lives on ancient Egypt and all of their wonders, we would be very hesitant to say, well, gee, I guess that's not right.
Right. Yeah, and I understand that to a degree, but there's I have to wonder if there is a faction behind that. I mean, there's suspicions that the Smithsonian hides away evidence. I wonder if there's a faction. Suspicion. If there's a faction behind some of the universities that encourages them to stay away from those theories.
Exactly, and that's exactly true. I've spoken with some archaeologists, and they say, you can get grant money to go study things at a certain distance back in time, or even a little bit further. But there are some areas, particularly in prehistory and going back more than 20,000 years, that you just can't get any grant money for. And yet there are people at the top of the power structure who obviously are interested in that. At the beginning of the 20th century, who was it that went over to Mesopotamia and was buying up a lot of that Sumerian artwork and steels and a lot of that information and bringing it back over here? John D. Rockefeller, that's who. And so at certain levels, these people know these things, and they're really fascinated with it, but they don't want us to know about it because it might interfere with their monopolies.
Yeah, which brings us to Iraq and the Baghdad, I think it was the National Museum. So we know that when we invaded Baghdad, there seemed to be some sort of gag order on protecting the National Museum there. And
let's look at the timeline, okay? Prior to our invasion of Iraq in 2003, was a run-up. If you'll remember, there were anti-war demonstrations that were even larger and greater than during the Vietnam War, and not only in the United States, but in Europe and other countries against us invading Iraq. So it wasn't like that was a surprise attack. You know, there was a build-up. Everybody knew that we were getting ready to do that. And so there were museum directors from all around the world that went to the Pentagon or contacted the Pentagon and said, you know, it is very, very important that you protect the Iraqi National Museum because after all, that is the area is the cradle of human civilization. And not only that, but I have in my files from 1999, 2000, 2001, that French and German archaeological teams were making, quote, amazing new discoveries, end quote, in the ancient Sumerian cities there in Iraq. And as I mentioned earlier, even Saddam Hussein believed himself the reincarnated Nebuchadnezzar and was trying to go back and regain the glories of Babylon. And so all of a sudden we invade after guaranteeing the safety of the National Museum. And yet what actually happened is that somebody stirred up a crowd of looters and they ran in and broke into the National Museum. Some United States troops were called to try to break that up and protect the museum, but then were called back by their superiors and withdrawn. And the looters went through the whole place and just looted hundreds of thousands of items, destroyed more. But the key to it is a lot of that was returned within months because it would turn up in local flea markets and people would buy it back up and they'd give it back to the museum. But Colonel Matthew Bogdanos, who investigated this Iraqi National Museum break-in for General Tommy Franks, wrote later that the basement was an inside job. So they used this looting crowd as just cover while operatives went in, had keys to some of the exhibits. They had knowledge of the exhibits. They bypassed expensive-looking fakes and went right for the basement, and where they took out all of this new stuff. And what was the new stuff? Well, the word is that they were getting some of this ancient technology that probably was passed down from the Anunnaki. And in fact, my sources tell me that, yes, they got ET technology. Problem is they couldn't figure out how to make it work. But that's what the invasion of Iraq may have been about, because I've been in the military and I know military strategy and tactics. And you don't just run into a country and go right to the capital. You have to take your objectives and then you consolidate your winnings, you control the countryside, and then you move on to your next objective until you've subdued the whole country. We never did do that. We made a beeline for Baghdad. We failed to pacify and control the countryside, which is why they're still having trouble over there today. And the only outcome of that was the looting of the Iraqi National Museum.
Well, a lot of people can accept us going to get oil, but I think it's harder to accept that there's an ancient technology. But ancient technology, is that something that was a new discovery, or is that something that was in there for some time?
No, this was the new discoveries.
Okay.
And the idea that we went in for the oil is ridiculous because we were only getting 16% of our imported foreign oil out of Iraq to begin with. And after we invaded, because of the fighting and the burning oil wells and everything else, we didn't even get that 16%. So the idea that we went in to get oil is ridiculous. Well, it's about as good as we went in there to get those weapons of mass destruction, which we never could find.
Well,
so there has to be another reason. And as far as I'm concerned, looting the Iraqi National Museum of ET technology is about as good as any.
Yeah, and assuming that there was technology there that we needed or wanted, what has been done with that? You know, what have we turned that into? Do you know?
Yeah, or can we even make it work? Well, again, let's go back. Since Saddam Hussein believed himself the reincarnated Nebuchadnezzar, let's go take a look at Nebuchadnezzar and what he was doing. He, of course, built the glory of ancient Babylon, hanging gardens, and, this wonderful place with even had flowing water, aqueducts, all kinds of what we think of as modern conveniences. But apparently he had even more exotic technology, because if you go to the Old Testament, read the book of Daniel, you'll find that Nebuchadnezzar built, based on knowledge he had of ancient knowledge, built what has been called a fiery furnace, but obviously it wasn't. It was made out of gold, and he gives the dimensions, and it was just kind of a large cabinet or little room made with gold, which is a highly conductive metal. And when his people would go in there, they would get sick and die. And so obviously they were generating some sort of force field or energy field there that was harmful to his people. So he goes down to Palestine and gets the three Hebrew priests, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and he brings them up to Babylon, and he says, okay, now you have access to the ancient records. Maybe you know how to make this thing work. And they said, well, you're not our king. You don't believe in our God, and we're not going to work for you. So he said, well, you're either going to make it work or you're going to die, because I'm going to put you in it. But he didn't just immediately toss them in there. It says first they donned their raiments and their cloaks and their hats. What's that got to do with anything? Why would they make record of that unless they were putting on some kind of radiation suits or some kind of protective clothing? So the three priests go in this structure that they call in a fiery furnace, which obviously wasn't a fiery furnace, or they would have burned up. And the king Nebuchadnezzar didn't even want to get close to it, so he hollers to his minions and says, are all three of them in there? And they said, yes, O king, all three's in there. In fact, there's a fourth in there. What? They put three people in, and now there's a fourth? And Nebuchadnezzar says, well, who's the fourth one? And they said, it's a son of God. So obviously some kind of really, something going for him, because he didn't, they knew he wasn't human. And so anyway, what are we talking about there? An energy field, maybe a wormhole or a time tunnel, or who knows? But the three people went in, and then there were four. And, of course, you never heard any more about it. That was the end of that story, except that Nebuchadnezzar made the three priests and put them in charge of Babylon. That's how impressed he was with what they were able to do. So is this a hint that they had ancient energy manipulation technology? I would suspect so.
But we may actually have some of that technology even before we'd gone into Baghdad. Obviously, right. If you believe in the secret space program, I don't think that it would make sense that the secret space program is just purely based on rocket technology. No. There are remote places in the world, but you can only launch so many rockets before somebody notices. So if they're getting into space, they're using some other advanced technology.
Well, before there was a blackout over the information in the early 50s and right after World War II, some prominent aviation people were talking about anti-gravity craft. Yeah. And I think that's where they went, and I think that's what they developed, but they wanted to keep that secret. And, Alan, you're right. They couldn't very well be launching great heavy-lift rockets, around the world without somebody spotting that. But how about while we are all fixated on watching those giant rockets take off from Cape Canaveral, with tons of smoke and flame and roaring sounds and everything. Meanwhile, over in the Okefenokee swamp, they just lifted off, with using anti-gravity technology.
Yeah.
And of course, that would be our most, sensitive weapons technology. So you have to keep all that secret.
Yeah, and that's the key here, the secret, and that's what your book, Our Occulted History, is really focused on. How in goodness name can you keep a secret like this for so long, for so many generations? I mean, if you think about just, let's say, a UFO recovery, crash recovery, or the development, even if it's compartmentalized, the development of a technology or a secret space program. I mean, you have to hire personnel. You have to have human beings. So how do you keep all these people under wraps?
Well, let me offer you two things. Number one, let's think about the Manhattan Project. Something like 25 or 30,000 people worked on the Manhattan Project, and yet nobody broke the silence. Nobody knew we had an atomic bomb until we set one off and announced it. So, yes, the government can keep secrets. Number two, it's not really secret anyway. There's been plenty of people who whistleblowers who've talked about the space fleet, who've talked about the Kennedy assassination, who've talked about insiders of 9/11, blah, blah, blah. But the problem is that it hasn't hit the mainstream media, the corporate controlled media. They don't acknowledge these whistleblowers, and they don't acknowledge the information that's out there. You and I can go find things, but for most people, unless they hear it on CNN or see it on NBC News, it's just not real. And so, again, I mentioned this early in the program, they don't have to really keep anything secret. They just have to keep it muddied, and in controversy, and then nothing gets done about it. And you still got plenty of people that'll go, oh, well, that can't be true. And they don't want to listen to it. They don't want to listen to believe it. And so, you just, nothing happens, and nothing, you have to, everybody, for instance, on the disclosure of UFOs and of the crews and of extraterrestrials, anyone who has seriously studied the issue comes to the realization that that's all very real, and that, yes, they're here. Okay, now we don't know precisely how many, we don't know precisely who and where they are, but we know that they're here and it's happening. And almost every thinking person is there, but yet it has not been officially acknowledged. And there are those who, unless the President of the United States or the Secretary of Defense got up publicly and said, yes, folks, there are aliens, and even then they probably wouldn't believe them, So it's just a question of keeping things obfuscated, okay? And then that way nothing gets done about it. And
all right, and Jim, I'm sorry to interrupt, but we're coming up on a break here, our last and final break. We'll be back, everybody. This is Epic Voyages Radio. Alan Smith with Jim Mars. Stay tuned.
You're listening to IRN, the Inception Radio Network, Chicago, Illinois.
Do you have a smartphone? If so, Inception Radio Network is the best app for you. Available on iTunes, Android, Samsung, and most other app stores. Just search Inception Radio Network. With the app you can listen live, check out podcasts of recent and past shows, view our videos, see what shows are coming up, who the guests are, and, via the chat room, send live questions to those guests. You know it makes sense. Check your app store now. Inception Radio Network. I'll see you there.
Don't have a computer? Is your internet connection down? Don't worry. Use your trusty cell phone or landline and call into our listen line at 401-283-6700 to listen to the Inception Radio Network 24/7. Again, that call-in number is 401-283-6700. For the Inception Radio Network, I am MJ.
Hello, IRN listeners. This is MJ saying hello and sharing an awesome secret I discovered. It's called DreamNuage.com. Fresh, raw, organic ingredients are used to create all their products. They are made in very small batches to ensure quality and freshness. Handmade in the USA, each product is created with care and with the finest organic ingredients. There are no preservatives, dyes, or chemicals in any product. Stop by Dream Nuage and relax. That's DREAMNUAGE.com. Simple, raw, organic.
Hello, Inception Radio Network. Would you like your favorite show to be played again live on air? Well, now the choice is in your hands with IRN's live request portal, an easy way to request your favorite show with a simple click. IRN's live request portal now gives you exclusive access to all of the shows. How easy is it? Simply type a show name or a guest name, click request, even write a dedication message, and that's it. Try it now. Simply visit InceptionRadioNetwork.com, click on the Live Request tab under the show menu. Now playing your favorite show is just a mouse click away. Hi, Inception Radio Network listeners. This is Amanda. Just a reminder that Inception Radio Network is on Twitter. Follow us at I_R_N and keep up to date about who's on tonight, what interviews they'll be doing, who's guest spotting, what topics they'll be covering. Tweet to us, tweet about us, retweet topics to your friends, and most importantly, never miss a great show again. That's I_R_N.
Hi, can you hear my voice? Imagine how many other people can hear it too. If you have advertising needs, then look no further. The Inception Radio Network currently has openings for on-air advertisements and radio show sponsorships. Given any thought to your target demographic? Inception has you covered there too. Advertising on a network gives you multiple opportunities to advertise on a wide variety of radio show broadcasts, and we have one to fit every advertising need. You know, in recent years, internet radio has exhibited a phenomenal listener growth. An Arbitron Edison survey shows that online radio boosts at least 33 million unique visitors each week and 54 million each month. And that number amazingly continues to grow. And these listeners are a part of many businesses' core demographics. And surveys have shown that internet radio listeners are far more likely than regular radio listeners to spend money on a whole range of activities. You know, internet listeners vote, they dine out and eat fast food, and they grab a cup of coffee. And here's the interesting one. They buy items online at a much higher rate than all other market segments combined. Internet radio also enables businesses to connect with consumers during work hours, where increasingly more lifestyle decisions are being made. Advertise with the best. The Inception Radio Network offers competitive advertising rates to fit just about anyone's advertising budget. Stop by today at www.inceptionradionetwork.com or call us toll-free at 1-888-919-2355. Get the word out. Get results with the Inception Radio Network.
EPIC is Extraordinary Phenomena Investigations Council, the forum for scholars, experts, and those fascinated by and involved in the study of ancient civilizations, conspiracies, cryptozoology, ETs, and UFOs, fringe science, the paranormal, and all manner of extraordinary phenomena. Please join EPIC as we examine the mysteries of the world and beyond on epicvoyagers.com. And for updates on the upcoming interactive video presentations, the latest news and discussion on the EPIC forum, as well as research, investigations, and membership opportunities. Epic Voyages program schedule is on the Inception Radio Network. Thank you for joining.
Hey, this is Alan B. Smith from Epic Voyages Radio live on Inception Radio Network. Welcome back. Our guest tonight is Jim Mars, and taking us out of the break was Why by Enigma, one of my favorite groups. And that's all we're asking tonight is why? Why, what, when, and where? And Jim is just a store of information. It's an absolute pleasure to talk with him tonight, and I'm glad you guys are here with us to share in this conversation. But Jim, I saw a comment in the chat room, and some people actually have some suspicion of you. This just popped up. It says Jim is convinced that the elite is tied in with the entities, in my opinion, serving as their minion in exchange for knowledge for their selfish occultic controls. So if I got that right, it sounds like they're suspecting you. Let me know if I'm wrong, Neutron, but it sounds like they're suspecting you of having some sort of insider information because you're playing toward their hand.
I don't know. I'm not real sure what they're getting at, but yes, I do have insider information, things I cannot, I can't always tell what I know because knowing and proving are sometimes two different things. And I always pretty well stick to writing and making public statements about things I can prove or that I'm certain in my own mind is true. But I have reason to believe that at the very top of the food chain, in fact, I raised the question in my book, Our Occulted History. What I did in this book is
but it sounds to me. Oh, go ahead, Jim. Go ahead.
Right. What I did was connect two topics that heretofore I don't think have been connected. One is the idea of ancient astronauts, which, thanks to that TV show, has gained more and more credence in the minds of a lot of people. And I think that talking with some of my fellow investigators and writers and researchers, we have come to the conclusion that the evidence for ancient astronauts is certainly compelling, if not overwhelming. So you've got that topic. The next topic, of course, is the New World Order bunch, or the idea that a clique of very wealthy, powerful people today are trying to run the world. And actually, this has been pretty well documented by a 2011 study by a Swiss institution that found that out of 43,000 multinational corporations, it all devolves down to about 20 banks that control them all with interlocking directorships and ownerships. So yes, well documented is the idea that today there's a small handful of people who are at least are trying to run the world. And my question going into our occulted history is, can these two topics be connected? Yes, they can, because the two time-honored methods of controlling the human population are first religion and then money or finances. And in fact, when Jesus, the Lord of Peace, when the one time he's documented as getting very angry and actually getting violent is when he chased the money changers off, okay? Now, did he do that? Did he go to the bank? No, they were in the temple. And this means that religion and money, finances, have been intertwined going all the way back through history. Now, religion is what ran the show up through the Middle Ages, and the universal church answered there. Nobody. In fact, they loaned money to the kings and queens that had control over the royalty. But then with the invention of the printing press and the Gutenberg Bible, and a lot of people don't forget, they don't know, that the first really truly banned book was the Bible. For about 100 years, it was illegal to possess a Bible or to sell a Bible. All right. And so there were bootleg copies passed all around. Well, this led to the Age of Enlightenment, when more and more people began to realize that the teachings of the church did not always coincide with the teachings of the Bible. And so the power of religion began to wane as it continues to do today. But the power of money then rose to take its place, because today most people in America like to think of themselves as free, but if you'll really stop and check, you'll find they can't walk off their job. They can't move to another town willy-nilly. They can't just be free because they got to make those monthly payments for utilities and for their credit cards and all their credit. And so today it's money that controls everything, and who controls the money. So that I think we see now that yes, this goes all the way back, and the people at the very top understand that. for example, I was kind of blown away when I found out that the Rothschilds, who many people feel like are that Rothschild banking dynasty is at pretty much close to the top of the power pyramid on this world. They believe themselves the descendants of the Sumerian Anunnaki god king Nimrod. Okay, and they even named one of their children Nimrod a few years back. So, they know about this stuff and they don't laugh it off. It's only the conventional thinking people who watch TV that don't know these things.
Yeah, well, actually, Neutron was not saying that you were a part of this. He was actually saying that the elite themselves were the minions of aliens. So I apologize to Neutron for that.
Okay, yeah, good, because hey, if I was part of that, I wouldn't be talking this way. Well, and what I end up, after tying the ancient astronauts and tracing them up through the secret societies, the Knights Templars, the Rosicrucians, all the Merovingians, all the way up, what I come up with is three possibilities. Either the people trying to run the world today are trying to seek communication and contact with these ancient Anunnaki, these ancient creator ETs, or number two, they are already in contact with them and are being guided or controlled by them, or number three, they are the ancient creators, the Anunnaki, the same people who have incredible lifespans, and some of them may still be alive today. So it's one of those possibilities, and I tend to lean towards that there are hybrids on this world that are the result of the hybridization between the original ET colonizers of the Earth and then the Earth primitives, and they improved the breed to the point of having a Cro-Magnon or modern man. And that at the very top of the food chain, some of these people realize this as a reality and are either in contact or want to be in contact with the ancient creators.
And you're listening to Epic Voyages Radio Live on Inception Radio Network. Our guest is Jim Marrs, author of Alien Agenda and Our Occulted History. And Jim, are you in the camp of David Icke as far as shapeshifting in this hybridization, or is it just these are biological hybrids, we can't tell the difference?
That's mostly in my hunt file, and I don't want to step out and make some statement here that I'm not entirely sure of, and I'm not entirely sure of all that. But I think the only difference between me and David Icke is that I have had enough of a public relations background that I don't think I'm going to win too many friends and influence too many people by calling the Queen Mother of England a 200-year-old reptilian cannibal.
Okay.
But having said that, I'm not prepared to say categorically that he's wrong. Mm-hmm. I think we just need more information. In fact, when I first heard the story of shape-shifting reptilians, I pretty well rolled my eyes and kind of snickered up my sleeve. But I want to tell you something. I have since had several experiences, including maybe about a half dozen people who come to me, unbeknownst to each other, and told me some pretty incredible stories. And it makes me think that I don't think all these people are just delusional. I think there's something going on there, but I'm not in a position to try to tell somebody this is what it is, because I'm not sure myself what it is.
Yeah, I can't rule out the possibility, but
right.
I don't see enough evidence there yet to support it. Yeah. Okay, so that's where you stand on it.
But one woman I talked to who claimed to be one said that you're not born you're born that way, but you don't realize it until your teenage years, at which time you become aware of your connection to the reptilians, kind of like the Borg, I guess, a mass mind, and that you're given the choice of joining them and becoming one of them, or turning your back on it and saying, no, I think I'll just stay human. And this woman said that she decided she wanted to stay human, didn't want anything to do with it. And at that point, normally, she would have forgotten all about that and would have gone on and lived her life as a normal human being. She said, but because she had a teenage history of drug use and being kind of a wild child, and she thinks that her brain got kind of rewired, and although she has remained human, she can still access the reptilian board mind, if you will. And so she knows that they are there and kind of what they're doing. And, fascinating stuff. I don't know what to tell you other than there's I think there's some weird stuff going on that we don't know the truth about. For example, another woman told me of an experience she had in East Texas with a good friend of hers that she saw shift into a reptilian form. And the woman actually acknowledged that and said, I'm sorry you saw the way I really am, and said, you weren't supposed to do that, and I can't be friends with you anymore. And so she tried to duck this woman for a long time, but she finally caught up with her and asked her some questions. And one of them was, well, how many of you are there? And the woman told her, well, not very many. Okay. But then as I asked this woman I'm talking to who had asked the question, I said, well, what do you think she meant? Does she mean there weren't very many in this little town where she lived, or there's not very many in Texas, or not very many in the United States, or there's not very many in the world? And the woman says, I don't know. I didn't ask her any follow-up questions. So we don't know. We don't know if that means there just wasn't very many in this one little Texas town, or if there's not very many in our world.
Jim, I have another question from the chat room. Do you have any findings to support William Lynn's claims that the Trilateral Group at the end of the Second World War were up to no good?
Well, for one thing, the Trilateral Commission was not formed until 1973. They weren't around at the end of World War II. And the Trilateral group was formed by Zbigniew Brzezinski and David Rockefeller as really kind of a more public extension of the more secretive Council on Foreign Relations. And the main reason for it was to bring the Asian economies in, which is what Trilateral stands for. The Trilateral is Japan, the economy of Japan, North America, and Europe. So no, I don't think that Trilateral Commission had anything to do with that, but then David Rockefeller, Brzezinski, and many others, particularly John J. McCloy, the Dulles brothers, etc., that were members of the Council on Foreign Relations at the end of World War II. Yes, they had designs on, number one, trying to set up a one world government. They were the same ones, and their families were the same ones behind the effort to form the League of Nations about the time of World War I. And their guy, the President of the United States, was actually pushing for that. In fact, Woodrow Wilson at Versailles was trying to get this going, and almost got it going, except for the United States Senate, that said, I don't think we're ready to give up our national sovereignty, and they wouldn't sign on for the League of Nations. And so these one-worlders formed the Council on Foreign Relations and its sister organization, the Royal Institute of International Affairs, right there at the time of the Versailles Treaty and of the end of World War I, for the express purpose of conditioning the public to one world government. And then they really made their headway during World War II, when the very same people began to push the idea of the United Nations. And of course, even towards the end of the war is still going on, but early on it was the Allies, and by the end of the war they kept talking and referring to the United Nations. And then of course they formed the United Nations, and there's been a squabble over that ever since. But yes, that's the same bunch, and their same goal is to try to unify the world.
Well, Jim, what can we do? So you're doing all this hard work. You're getting a lot of the evidence. You're gathering it together. You're writing these great books. But what can we do? Because the mass media is not going to run with this. We know that, at least for now.
Well,
hopefully it's going to change, but
the mass media can't tell you any of this stuff because they are owned and controlled by these very people. That's where they really have an upper hand, because they control the attention span of the public. Okay, they can't really tell you how to think, but they can certainly tell you what to think about. Okay, and they keep us distracted and off worrying about ISIS and worrying about this, that, and the other thing, and plus divided and fighting with each other over sex matters, same-sex marriage, and stem cell research, and racial matters, ethnic matter, anything they can to keep us fighting with each other. So what do? Okay. Well, again, let me reiterate. I am not asking for anybody's belief, but read my books, particularly read my new book. It'll be out at the end of this month, called Population Control: How Corporate Owners Are Killing Us. Okay? Now, you need to read about what all is in the food, what's in the water, what's in the aspartame, what's in the fluoride, what's in the herbicides, the bad air, bad water, bad food, all of this. And basically, it's to cull the population. Now, what can you do about it? Well, you can't change the national government, and you can't change some of those giant corporations. But what you can do is educate yourself as to what the true issues are, and then act accordingly. Grow yourself a garden so you have your own garden vegetables, and you don't have to worry about GMO, and you don't have to worry about Monsanto's Roundup herbicide that is now being outlawed everywhere but here because it causes cancer, among other things. And so keep yourself informed. Buy organic materials. Get away from the drugs. And I'm not talking about illegal drugs. If you think we have a problem with illegal drugs, you ought to see what kind of problem we have with legal drugs. It used to be against the law to advertise drugs on TV, but today, if you watch broadcast TV, if they're not selling you a car or truck, they're selling you a drug. Okay, and figure out what these drugs are actually doing for. Don't listen to the advertisers where the pretty girls, flitting through the field full of flowers, and start listening to all this stuff about if you take this, it'll cause this, and death, and start paying attention, educate yourself, and just say no.
Yeah,
and we got to go.
That's good advice, Jim. That's something that we can actually do ourselves.
Yeah, when they say, let's go have a war with Iran, just say, no, we're not going to do that. In fact, let me tell you something. Here's my solution to end all war, okay? And I can say it in 2 words: stay home. If everybody stayed home, there wouldn't be a war.
Well, yeah, there was an attempt to do that in the 60s, and we know how that went down.
And it kind of worked. We lost, but
to a degree,
at least we got out of there.
Yeah, but the thing is with as far as conspiracy theories and an alien presence and ancient aliens, this is all information. Organic food and that sort of thing. I can do that myself. I can learn about it. I can take care of it. But this overarching issue of who's really behind everything, if the mainstream media is not going to touch it, then how do we make a change? How do we open that box?
Well, that's when you have to study and read on your own. Okay, read my books, read other people's books, get on the internet, surf all around. There's lots of answers. Of course, now here's my warning about the internet. The upside of the internet is that anybody and everybody has access to the internet. The downside is that anybody and everybody has access to the internet. So you have to be discerning. You have to really just look over everything and don't buy into every little thing that comes along, but then don't just discard it either. Just study, start thinking for yourself, use that God-given computer in your head called a brain. And like number one, when you read something and some statement, they're doing this or we got to do this or whatever, stop and ask yourself, who's saying that? And what reason? Yeah. What is their motivation for saying that? And if you get somebody that says, we need to build more nuke plants, and then you find out that they're a member of the Atomic Industrial Forum, which is a pro-industry organization, then you know where they're coming from. They want to build more nuke plants because that's how they're making money.
Well, it all
and
comes
so you
full
don't
circle,
necessarily
too,
want to buy into that.
Yeah, it comes full circle because the education's not there. Do you know? I mean,
Exactly.
critical thinking is not something that's really taught in schools. I mean, it was less so when I was in high school. But
exactly, and that's why you got to do that on your own. You got to study on your own. Here's the thing: if you can read at all, then you're ahead of the game, because you can get online or you can go to the library and you can read on any topic you want. If you want to go into history, if you want to go into physics, if you want to go into anything, if you can read, just seriously apply yourself, read the material, delve into the subject until you feel like you have a working knowledge of that. And then that is the road to wisdom. The road to wisdom is education balanced with experience. And so if you can get a little experience and study at the same time, you're going to become wise.
So, Jim, do you have anything coming up as far as talks or presentations, conferences?
In October, I'm going to New Orleans for a Kennedy assassination type thing. But, and then I may be going to Toronto in early October. To speak up there. Those people are really awake. They're really going after it. And but
if anybody out there I'm sorry. Go ahead, Jim.
No, but until then, I guess I'm mostly focusing on promoting the new book, Population Control. And I think it's really, really important for people to read the information in Population Control, because I think that we are getting past the politics, past the theologies. I think it's becoming a matter of self-preservation. If you want to survive...
Cool. Jim, I'm going to have to stop you right there. We are getting to the end of the show. Thank you so much for being on the show, Jim. Everybody should check out his books, jimmars.com. Actually, Dr. Laura Blythe Tagg, July 6th, will be interviewing on his new book, Population Control, How Corporate Owners Are Killing Us. And next week, be sure to join us with Dr. Aaron Judkins with Jason Offutt book, What Lurks Beyond the Paranormal in Your Backyard. And Jim, again, thank you so much, and have a wonderful evening.
Thank you, Alan. Good night to everyone.
All right, cheers. Be well, man. All right, so that's it for Epic Voyages Radio tonight. Thank you for everybody in the chat room, social media, everybody out there. Thanks for joining us. Be sure to tune in next week on IRN Live and also Dark Matter Radio on Friday nights at 8 p.m. And remember that if the spirit moves you, you can follow us on Twitter at Epic Voyagers, or you can do Epic Voyagers Radio on Instagram. Special thanks to Dr. Laura Blythe Tagg, Ken Cherry, the founder of Epic, and our IRN producer, Joe Champion. Everybody, thank you, and have a good night, and let the mystery take you.
Thank you for being with us tonight. Please join us again next Monday evening for Extraordinary Phenomena Investigations Council's Epic Voyages. I'm Roger Peacock for Epic. Until next time.